A few months ago, I came home from the grocery store with what I thought was a pretty sensible haul. Nothing fancy. Chicken breasts, eggs, milk, yogurt, a bag of spinach, strawberries, and carrots, cheese, a couple of things for lunches, and a few sale items I figured we would use eventually. I spent a little over $140. That number bothered me, but not enough to surprise me anymore. Groceries had been creeping up for so long that I had gotten used to standing at the checkout, looking at the total, and thinking, well, I guess this is just what it costs now. I carried everything into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. And that was when I had a problem. There was almost nowhere to put the new food. Not because we had plenty of meals ready to eat. Not because the refrigerator was stocked in some organized, sensible way. It was just full. So I started moving things around. Behind a carton of eggs, I found half a bag of spinach that had turned dark and wet. Under a container of leftovers, there was a package of strawberries with mold starting on the bottom. In the produce drawer, a bunch of celery had gone soft enough to bend in half. Then I found 2 open containers of sour cream. I had bought another one that afternoon. There was also a container of cooked chicken from earlier in the week that I could no longer remember making. I stood there with the refrigerator door open, holding food I had paid for and was now about to throw away. That was the contradiction that finally got to me. I had spent part of the morning checking the weekly grocery ad. I had compared prices. I had chosen store brands. I had skipped a few things because they seemed too expensive. I had felt responsible. Then I came home and threw away close to $20 worth of food. Maybe a little more. And the worst part was that this was not some unusual cleaning day. I had done versions of this before. A few wilted vegetables one week, a forgotten container of leftovers the next, yogurt past the date, deli meat we opened and didn't finish, half a jar of sauce pushed behind newer groceries. None of it felt serious on its own. $3 here, $5 there, but at 52, I have started looking at small leaks differently. There are enough big bills in life already. Insurance, utilities, car repairs, medical costs. The things around the house that seem to break at the exact wrong time. And then there is retirement sitting somewhere in the background of every financial decision, even when you are not actively thinking about it. I had spent years telling myself I needed to be more careful with money. But apparently, some of the money I was trying so hard to save was quietly turning into garbage in my own kitchen. That evening, I sat at the table with the grocery receipt beside me. I started thinking about how I had always used the refrigerator. I treated it like storage. If there was an open spot, I filled it. If something was on sale, I might buy an extra one. If I could not immediately see whether we had something, I often bought it again just to be safe. And once food moved behind something else, it practically disappeared from my mind. A few days later, I came across several Japanese ideas for organizing a refrigerator around visibility, rotation, and reducing food waste. What caught my attention was how ordinary the ideas were. Nothing expensive, nothing high-tech, no complicated meal planning system. The basic idea seemed to be that food should be easy to see, easy to use, and hard to forget. That sounded almost too simple. So I decided to test it. For 30 days, I would follow 11 fridge rules and keep track of what I threw away. Not perfectly, not like some home organization show, just in my normal kitchen, with my normal grocery budget, and the same habits I had built up over decades. I assumed the biggest problem would be spoiled produce. But when I started taking everything out of the refrigerator, I noticed something more embarrassing. I did not have too little food. I had too much food that I had stopped noticing. Once I emptied the refrigerator, I could finally see the problem clearly. I had been using it like a closet. If there was room, I put something there. If there wasn't room, I pushed something else farther back. There was no real system. Milk went where milk usually went. Eggs had their shelf. But beyond that, almost everything was placed wherever I could make it fit. Leftovers were stacked behind yogurt. Cheese was in 2 different drawers. Open jars were mixed with unopened jars. Vegetables were buried underneath vegetables, and the freezer was even worse. I found a bag of frozen corn under 2 packages of meat, half a loaf of bread I had completely forgotten about, and 3 different containers of soup. I could not tell you how old any of them were. The more I looked, the more I realized that I was not just wasting food because things spoiled. I was wasting food because I kept buying things I already had. That had become so normal that I barely noticed it. Take shredded cheese. If I was at the store and could not remember whether we had enough cheese for tacos, I bought another bag. That felt responsible. I was preventing another trip. But when I cleaned out the refrigerator, I found 2 open bags of shredded cheese and a block of cheddar. The same thing happened with mustard. I had 3 kinds. 2 were already open. I had recently bought another one because it was on sale. That is the strange thing about grocery spending. A lot of waste does not feel wasteful while you are doing it. It feels practical. A sale feels like saving money. Buying an extra one feels like planning ahead. Picking up something, just in case, feels safer than running out. But if the food sits there until it gets stale, forgotten, or replaced by something newer, the low price did not really help. I also noticed another habit that was costing me money. I was shopping for the person I imagined I would be that week. Every Monday, apparently, I believed I was about to become somebody who ate enormous salads. So I bought spinach, maybe kale, fresh herbs, sometimes berries, and a large container of Greek yogurt. By Thursday, real life had usually taken over. There might be an appointment after work, a tired evening, leftovers from another meal, or simply no desire to make the meal I had pictured in the produce aisle. The ingredients were not bad purchases by themselves. The problem was that I was buying more possibilities than we had actual meals. For 1 week, I decided not to change anything yet. I just watched. Every time I threw away food, I wrote it down on a piece of paper taped inside a cabinet door. A little produce, a couple of leftovers, some deli meat, part of a container of yogurt. By the end of the week, the total came to about $24. It was a particularly bad week, so I did not pretend that meant I was wasting $24 every single week. But even if the real average was only $12 or $15, that was enough to bother me. Over a year, small amounts stopped being small. And sitting there looking at that list, I thought about my mother and grandmother. They did not have a refrigerator inventory app. They did not own matching clear storage bins. They were not constantly talking about food waste, but they usually knew what was in the kitchen. They knew what needed to be eaten first. They knew which leftovers were for lunch tomorrow. They checked what they had before buying more. Not because they were perfect, because food had a job. That was the part I had lost. My refrigerator was full of food, but much of it had no plan attached to it. So I took everything out again. I put it on the kitchen counter and started counting. 3 mustards, 2 open bags of cheese, 4 containers of leftovers, more vegetables than we could realistically eat in the next few days, and several things I had almost bought again that week. For the first time, I could see that the real problem was not that I needed a better grocery deal. I needed to stop losing track of the groceries I had already paid for. The next morning, I started the experiment. My first instinct was to make it complicated. I almost ordered a set of clear refrigerator bins online because that seemed like the kind of thing people do when they decide to get organized. Then I stopped myself. That would have been exactly the wrong lesson. I was trying to save money, not spend another $100 making the refrigerator look better. So I used what I already had. A few clear containers, some old plastic baskets, masking tape, a marker, and about 40 minutes at the kitchen counter. The first rule was the one that felt the strangest. I stopped trying to keep the refrigerator full. For years, an empty shelf had made me feel like I was running out of food. A full refrigerator felt secure, but I started aiming for something closer to about 70% full. Not an exact measurement. I did not stand there with a calculator. I just wanted enough open space that I could actually see what was inside. That alone changed the refrigerator immediately. For the first time in a long time, I could look from one side to the other without moving 6 things. Then I gave food permanent homes. Dairy went in one area. Leftovers went on one shelf. Condiments stayed together. Cheese and deli items had one section. Vegetables stayed where I could actually see them instead of being scattered across 2 drawers and a shelf. That sounds almost too obvious to call a rule. But before that, I was organizing based on where something fit. Now I was organizing based on where I would look for it. The third change was using clear containers whenever it made sense. I had a habit of putting leftovers into whatever container was available. Sometimes that meant an old margarine tub or a dark plastic container. 3 days later, I would open the refrigerator, see a mystery container, and tell myself I would check it later. Later usually came when I was cleaning it out. So cooked chicken looked like chicken. Rice looked like rice. Leftover vegetables were visible. It became harder for food to hide. Then I started dating the foods I was most likely to forget. Nothing elaborate. A little piece of masking tape that said, Mon, Shieli, Wed, Chicken, Thieu, Pasta. That was enough. I did not need a complicated tracking system. I just needed to stop playing the game of, when did we make this? The fifth rule became the most useful almost immediately. I created one small section at eye level and called it the Eat First area. Anything that needed attention went there. Half a container of berries, a piece of cooked chicken, an open package of deli turkey, half an onion, a yogurt that had been sitting around longer than the others. Before that, those foods had been scattered throughout the refrigerator. Now they were in one place. When I opened the door looking for lunch, I saw them before I saw anything new. The sixth rule was similar. Anything already open stayed visible. That included shredded cheese, lunch meat, dips, sauces we were actively using, and half-used ingredients from dinner. I had a bad habit of opening something, pushing it back, then opening another one a week later. Keeping the opened version where I could see it made that happen less often. For small things, I used 2 cheap baskets I already owned. One held yogurt and snack-size items. The other held small cheese packages and little containers that usually rolled around or disappeared behind something larger. That was Rule 7. Rule 8 was something I never would have thought of before this experiment. I deliberately kept one area empty, not because I had forgotten to buy something, not because I was waiting for a sale. It was simply empty space. At first, that bothered me more than I expected. I had spent years seeing unused refrigerator space as something that needed to be filled. But that little empty area gave me room for leftovers, a large pot, or groceries that needed to be used soon. It also stopped the whole refrigerator from becoming packed again 2 days after I cleaned it. The freezer took longer. Rule 9 was to stop stacking everything flat. I started storing bags and packages vertically whenever possible, more like files in a drawer. Frozen vegetables stood next to frozen meat. Bread was visible. Soup containers had their own section. Suddenly, I could see what we had without pulling out half the freezer. Rule 10 was simple. Old food moved forward. New food went behind it. I had heard versions of that rule my whole life, but I was not actually doing it. I would come home from the store and put the newest yogurt right in front because it was convenient. Then the older yogurt disappeared behind it, so I reversed the habit. And the last rule happened before I went shopping. I opened the refrigerator. I opened the freezer. I took a quick picture of both with my phone. Then I looked in the pantry. That became the starting point for my grocery list. Not what sounded good, not what was advertised, not what I vaguely remembered needing. What we already had came first. The refrigerator looked strangely bare after I finished. There was food in it, but there was also space. For a moment, I actually worried that I had gone too far. Then, over the next few days, something started happening that I had not expected. I was not just throwing away less food. I was putting fewer things in my grocery cart in the first place. About 2 weeks into the experiment, I realized I needed to stop guessing and actually look at the numbers. I had already noticed that the trash can was filling more slowly. There were fewer limp vegetables at the end of the week, fewer mystery containers, fewer moments where I opened something and thought, I forgot we had this. But I wanted to know whether the change was actually affecting our grocery spending, or whether I was just enjoying a cleaner refrigerator. So I pulled out a few grocery receipts from the previous month and compared them with what I was spending now. The month before I started this experiment, our grocery spending had been around $675. That included ordinary food, a few household basics, and the usual extras that somehow make their way into the cart. Then I went back through the little waste notes I had been keeping. I could identify somewhere around $65 to $70 worth of food that had been bought to eat and never actually eaten. I was not counting onion skins, bones, coffee grounds, or anything else that normally belongs in the trash. I was counting food that had been perfectly usable when I bought it. Produce, leftovers, dairy, lunch meat, bread, half-used ingredients. That number bothered me more than I expected. $70 is not a fortune, but if you are trying to build up an emergency fund, cover a higher insurance bill, or put a little more toward retirement, $70 is not nothing either. By the end of the first full month using the new system, grocery spending had dropped to a little over $630. Not dramatically. Not enough for me to claim I had cracked some secret code, but enough to notice. The food I could clearly identify as wasted had dropped to around $30. That was the first result that felt real. I had not changed stores. I had not started clipping stacks of coupons. I had not stopped buying foods we liked. I was simply losing less of what I had already paid for. But the bigger surprise was where part of that savings came from. It was not just spoiled food. It was duplicate buying. One afternoon, I was in the grocery store with 4 things on my list: yogurt, cheese, carrots, salsa. Normally, I would have put all 4 into the cart without thinking much about it. Instead, I pulled out my phone and looked at the refrigerator picture I had taken before leaving home. We still had 5 yogurts. There was half a block of cheddar. Almost a full bag of carrots was sitting in the produce drawer, and there was an unopened jar of salsa on the lower shelf. I crossed all 4 off. That was around $16 I did not spend. And what struck me was that I would not have considered those purchases wasteful. I would have told myself we were going to use them eventually. That phrase, "we'll use it eventually," had probably cost me more money over the years than I realized. Sometimes eventually comes. Sometimes it doesn't. A week later, the Eat First shelf saved me money in a different way. It was a Wednesday night. I was tired. I had no desire to cook. I was already thinking about ordering takeout. Then I opened the refrigerator, and right in front of me was some cooked chicken from the night before, half a container of rice, and roasted vegetables. Before this experiment, the chicken might have been behind a gallon of milk, and the vegetables buried in another container. This time, I saw dinner. I reheated everything, added a little sauce, and we ate what we already had. I am not going to count every avoided takeout meal as savings from refrigerator organization. That would be stretching the truth. But that particular meal probably kept $30 or $35 in our account, and it changed the way I thought about value. I used to focus heavily on what something cost at the store. Was spinach $2.99 or $3.49? Was chicken 50 cents cheaper per pound this week? Those things still matter, but I started realizing that the cheapest food is not always the food with the lowest price tag. A $2.99 bag of spinach that goes into the trash cost me more than a $3.49 bag that I actually finish. A sale is not a savings if I buy twice as much as we can use, and a full refrigerator is not a sign that I am prepared if half of what is inside has already been forgotten. For the first time, I started thinking less about the cost per package and more about the cost of the food we actually ate. I thought I had solved the problem at that point. The refrigerator looked better. The waste was down. The grocery total was a little lower. Then I made the mistake I tend to make whenever something starts working. I tried to improve it too much. Once I saw the grocery total come down and the amount of wasted food shrink, I got a little too enthusiastic. I started treating the refrigerator like a project. That was my first mistake. I began watching organization videos and looking at those perfectly arranged refrigerators where every berry has its own container and every shelf looks like a display at a store. For a few days, I thought maybe I needed that too. I put a set of refrigerator bins in an online shopping cart. Then I added a few more containers. By the time I was done, I was looking at close to $90 worth of organizers. And I caught myself. I was about to spend almost $100 to solve a problem that had started because I was buying too much. That made no sense. So I closed the page. I kept using the containers and baskets I already owned. A few did not match. One had a cracked lid. Another was an old deli container. None of that mattered. The food was visible. That was the purpose. It reminded me of the way older generations often handled things around the house. They reused jars. They saved containers. They made a system out of what they had. Not because they were trying to create a certain look, but because the system needed to work. That lesson became more important than I expected. Good organization should reduce spending. It should not become another reason to shop. My second mistake was labeling too much. At first, I got carried away with the masking tape and marker. I labeled leftovers, then I labeled open cheese, then sauces, then produce. At one point, I had a date written on a container of grapes. That was unnecessary. By the fourth or fifth day, the refrigerator looked like evidence in an investigation. More importantly, I was getting tired of maintaining it. That was a warning sign. Any money-saving system that depends on me being unusually disciplined every single day is probably not going to last. So I simplified it. I only dated foods where the timing actually mattered. Leftovers, cooked meat, open deli meat, prepared dishes, anything where I knew I might look at it 3 days later and have no idea when it had gone into the refrigerator. The rest did not need paperwork. That small adjustment made the system much easier to live with. Then I made a mistake that sounds responsible, but actually made me miserable. I became too determined not to waste anything. If something was sitting in the eat first area, I felt like I had to eat it, even if I did not want it. One afternoon, I ate leftover pasta for lunch for the third day in a row, simply because I did not want to throw away the last portion. Nothing was wrong with it. It was perfectly safe. I was just tired of eating it. And sitting there at the table, forcing myself through another bowl, I realized I had turned frugality into punishment. That was not the goal. Reducing waste does not mean every spoonful has to be rescued. It means I should buy and cook quantities that make sense in the first place. That was a much better lesson. So, instead of feeling guilty about the occasional leftover, I started serving slightly smaller amounts. If I made chili, I did not automatically make enough for 6 meals. If a recipe called for an entire bag of something and I knew we would not finish it, I adjusted the recipe. Sometimes the solution to food waste happened before the food ever entered the refrigerator. The next mistake was almost the opposite. Because I liked seeing more space in the fridge, I started buying too little. I became too focused on keeping it at that comfortable, open level. One week, I looked at the refrigerator on Sunday and felt very pleased with myself. Everything was visible. Nothing was crowded. By Thursday, we were out of milk, eggs, and a couple of lunch basics. So I made an extra grocery trip. I went in for maybe $12 worth of food. I came out spending almost $40. There was a sale on coffee. I picked up a snack. I remembered something else we might need. That one extra trip wiped out much of the savings I had worked for that week. That taught me something important. The 70% idea was not supposed to be a rule about keeping the refrigerator looking empty. It was about visibility. There was no prize for having the most open shelf space. The refrigerator still had to support real life. It needed enough food to get us through the week. I just did not need it packed so tightly that food disappeared. Then there was the freezer. For the first 2 weeks, I had focused so much on the refrigerator that I convinced myself the freezer was good enough. It was not. The freezer was still where food went to become invisible. One evening, I was getting ready to put chicken on the grocery list when I decided to check more carefully. I pulled out 2 bags of frozen vegetables, then a container of soup, then a bag of rolls, and underneath all of that was a package of chicken I had bought nearly a month earlier. There was another package behind it. I had been planning to buy more meat, while almost 2 dinners were already sitting 6 inches away from me. That was the moment the vertical storage rule finally made sense. I took the loose bags and packages and stood them up as much as the freezer allowed. Instead of seeing only the top item in a pile, I could see the edges of several things at once. I grouped meat together, vegetables together, bread together, prepared meals together. It was not beautiful, but I could finally answer a simple question without digging through everything. What do we have? And that question was becoming the center of the whole experiment. Not what should I buy, not what is on sale, not even what do I feel like eating. First, what do we already have? By the end of the first month, I had stopped trying to follow all 11 rules perfectly. A few had become automatic. A few needed to be adjusted. A few only mattered in certain situations. But the rules that lasted all had one thing in common. They made the next decision easier. And once I understood that, the whole system became much simpler. By the second month, the refrigerator looked less like a project and more like a normal refrigerator again. That was a good sign. I was no longer standing there with a marker every night. I was not rearranging containers just to keep everything looking neat, and I had stopped thinking about all 11 rules as separate rules. Most of them had started falling into 4 simple habits. The first was visibility. If I could not see the food, there was a good chance I would forget it. So I kept the things we used most in predictable places. Leftovers stayed together, dairy stayed together, open foods stayed where I could see them. Small items went into one basket instead of rolling around behind larger containers. The freezer stayed more vertical than stacked whenever possible. It was not about making the refrigerator beautiful. It was about being able to open the door and understand what was there in about 10 seconds. That changed more than I expected. Before, I would open the refrigerator and still feel like I had no idea what to make. Now I could actually see the beginnings of a meal. The second habit was using the oldest food first. That became much easier once I stopped hiding it. If there was leftover chicken from Monday and fresh chicken I had just bought on Thursday, the Monday chicken stayed in front. If there were 2 yogurts getting close to the date, they went where I would see them first. If half an onion or half a bell pepper was already cut, that went into the eat first area. That small shelf became more useful than any complicated meal plan I had tried. One night I opened the refrigerator and saw half a bell pepper, some cooked ground beef, shredded cheese, and 3 tortillas. None of those things sounded impressive by themselves, but because they were all visible, dinner was obvious. I made 3 quesadillas and a small salad. That meal used food that probably would have become leftovers of leftovers, and it kept me from making another grocery run. The third habit was leaving enough space to think. That may sound strange, but a crowded refrigerator creates its own kind of confusion. When everything is packed tightly together, I stop seeing individual ingredients. I just see a wall of food. So I still try to keep some open space. Not exactly 70% every day. Real life does not work that neatly. After a holiday or a big grocery trip, the refrigerator gets fuller. Before shopping day, it gets emptier. But I no longer treat every empty spot like a problem that needs to be fixed. That was a bigger mental shift than I expected. For years, a full refrigerator had felt like security. Now I started seeing too much food as a responsibility. Every extra item was something that needed to be remembered, used, or eventually thrown away. The fourth habit became the most important one. I started shopping from the refrigerator before I shopped at the store. That one change affected almost everything else. Before making a grocery list, I checked 3 places: the refrigerator, the freezer, the pantry. Sometimes I took a quick picture. Sometimes I just stood there for 5 minutes and wrote things down. Then I asked a different question. Instead of asking, "What do I want to cook this week?" I started asking, "What can I cook with what is already here?" That sounds like a small difference. It was not. One Sunday, I found 2 chicken breasts in the freezer, broccoli that needed to be used, half a bag of carrots, tortillas, cheddar cheese, rice, and a jar of salsa. Normally, I might have gone to the store and bought ingredients for 4 completely different dinners. Instead, I built the week around what was already there. Monday was chicken with rice and broccoli. Tuesday was chicken tacos with salsa and cheese. Wednesday was vegetable quesadillas with carrots on the side. I still had to buy a few things: milk, eggs, fruit, a couple of lunch items. But the list was much shorter. More importantly, almost everything I bought had a specific purpose that was very different from the way I used to shop. I used to buy ingredients because they looked useful. Now I was buying them because I knew where they fit. I also added a 10-minute refrigerator reset once a week, usually on Sunday. Nothing dramatic. I checked the produce drawer first, what needed to be eaten soon. Then leftovers, what was still good. Then dairy and deli items. Then the freezer. Then I came up with 3 or 4 simple dinner ideas. The whole thing took less time than driving back to the store because I had forgotten what we already had. And that was when I realized the refrigerator had changed jobs. It was no longer just a place to keep food cold. It had become information. It told me what needed to be eaten, what I did not need to buy, what could become dinner, what was getting low, and what had been sitting there too long. That information reduced decisions. I was not standing in the grocery aisle trying to remember whether we had carrots. I was not opening 3 cabinets looking for something I thought I had bought. I was not buying another jar of sauce because I could not remember the one behind the milk. The savings from each decision were small: $3, $6, maybe $10. But the bigger benefit was that I stopped having so many little financial decisions to make. And at 52, I have started valuing that almost as much as the money. I do not want every part of my household to require constant attention. I want systems that quietly make the right choice easier. By then, I thought I understood what this experiment had taught me. But the part I ended up caring about most had very little to do with the refrigerator itself. A couple of months after I started this experiment, I noticed something that was hard to put on a spreadsheet. Opening the refrigerator felt different. That sounds like a small thing, but it was real. Before, I would open the door and see clutter. Half-used containers, food I had forgotten, things I should probably cook, things I had already bought twice. There was always a little bit of guilt mixed in with it. Now I usually open the refrigerator and know what I am looking at. I know what needs to be eaten first. I know what we have enough of. I know what can become dinner. And I know what does not need to go on the grocery list. That calmness ended up mattering more to me than having a perfectly organized refrigerator. Over the first couple of months, the direct savings were fairly modest. Between less food waste and fewer duplicate purchases, I was probably keeping around $40 a month that used to disappear without much thought. Some months a little more, some months less. $40 is not a dramatic amount of money. It is not going to fund retirement by itself. But $40 a month is $480 a year. At 52, I have stopped dismissing amounts like that. $480 can help cover a higher insurance bill. It can pay part of a car repair. It can stay in the emergency fund instead of leaving the checking account. It can go toward retirement. Or it can simply create a little breathing room in a month when everything seems to arrive at once. That is what frugality has started to mean to me at this age. Not squeezing every nickel until life becomes unpleasant, not refusing to buy anything enjoyable, and not turning the kitchen into a place where every leftover has to be saved at all costs. It means paying attention to where money quietly disappears. For years, I thought grocery savings mostly happened at the store. Find a sale, compare prices, buy store brands, use a coupon. Those things still matter. But now I think a big part of grocery savings happens after you get home. Did you actually use what you bought? Did you remember it was there? Did it become a meal? Or did the bargain eventually end up in the trash? That changed the way I look at a cheap price. If I buy 2 containers because they are on sale and throw one away, I did not save money. If I buy a large package because the unit price is better but cannot finish it, I did not get better value. And if I keep buying food because an empty shelf makes me uncomfortable, I am not preparing. I am just increasing the amount of inventory I have to manage. I think my mother and grandmother understood this better than I did. They would not have called it inventory management. They would have simply said, use what we have. Leftovers became lunch. The older jar got opened before the new one. You check the refrigerator before going to the store. If there were 3 carrots left, those carrots had a good chance of appearing in dinner. There was nothing glamorous about it, and I do not want to romanticize the past. A lot of household work was harder then, and there is nothing noble about not having enough. But there was a practical respect for what had already been purchased. Somewhere along the way, I had replaced part of that habit with abundance. Bigger grocery stores, more choices, larger refrigerators, warehouse-sized packages, constant sales. It became very easy to confuse having more with being better prepared. This little experiment reminded me that I do not need the most food in the house. I need the right amount of food that we will actually use. That lesson reaches beyond groceries. At this point in life, I do not want more things to manage if I can help it. I already have enough decisions. There are bills, appointments, maintenance, work, family responsibilities, retirement planning, the ordinary things that come with being in your 50s. So when a simple household system removes a few decisions instead of adding more, I notice. The refrigerator does not have to be perfect. Some weeks it still gets messy. Sometimes something still gets forgotten. Occasionally I still throw away produce I meant to use. And yes, every once in a while I still buy something only to come home and discover we already had it. But it happens less often now. That is enough for me. I am not looking for financial perfection. I am looking for fewer leaks, a little less waste, a little more control, and a household that does not make money feel like it is constantly slipping through my fingers. If you decide to try any of these fridge rules, I would be curious to know what food you throw away most often. For me, produce and leftovers were the biggest offenders. And if you enjoy practical frugal living lessons for life after 50, you can subscribe and follow along. These days, when I open my refrigerator, I no longer see empty space that needs to be filled. I see food we have already paid for, and that is usually a good reminder to use what we have before bringing more home.